Bible prophecy is active and unfolding daily. Zechariah 12, Isaiah 17, Psalm 83, Ezekiel 38. Here is what the LameStream Media is not telling you. Shalom, my friends. Welcome to this week's newscast. It sure is something to watch these last-minute deals of Obama throwing America under the bus. Trying to, that is. From the Associated Press, the Obama administration, specifically through last-minute actions by former Secretary of State John Kerry, quietly released $221 million to the Palestinian Authority. That is $221 million, which Republican members of Congress had been blocking. A written notification dated January 20th was sent to Congress just hours before President Trump took the oath of office. Hours before. But now, due to the objections of congressional Republicans, the State Department is reviewing Kerry's decision. If you ask me, I think Trump will put a stop to it. Oops, flash from the New York Times. The Trump administration is preparing a draft executive order titled Auditing and Reducing U.S. Funding of International Organizations. This executive order calls for terminating funding for any UN agency or other international body that gives full membership to the Palestinian Authority or Palestine Liberation Organization, or supports any activity that circumvents sanctions against Iran. The draft order also calls for terminating funding for any organization that is, quote, controlled or substantially influenced by any state that sponsors terrorism, close quote. The order then calls for enacting at least a 40% overall decrease in remaining U.S. funding for international organizations. Then, from the Times of Israel, the Trump administration has informed the Palestinian Authority that it is freezing the transfer of $221 million authorized by the Obama administration in its final hours on January 20th. Trump put the kibosh on it. And Trump continues to drop my jaw, my friends. He's also preparing an executive order to direct the Pentagon and State Department to craft a plan to create safe zones in Syria for civilians fleeing the conflict. Trump said such safe zones could serve as an alternative to admitting Syrian refugees into the United States. Now, 2 weeks ago, I pointed you to a new video by Scott Clark that defines the old catchphrase, the fullness of the Gentiles, in an entirely new way. It's a most important clarification for all believers to get a firm grasp of, and brings up, for me, another very important clarification for all believers to get a firm grasp of, and that is concerning the word church that we all see in our Bibles. Now, just as the fullness of the Gentiles doesn't mean what everyone thought it meant, it's not talking about the fullness of believers all coming in and then the rapture happening. And in the same way, the word church does not mean what everyone thinks it means either. And you probably won't hear me use the word church in any of my word studies. And that's because Satan has done so many things to create improper concepts and ideas in the minds of practically everyone who is searching with a passionate love for the narrow path that leads to Elohim. And, to say church, it just gets everybody to think about religion. Oh, how do you find God? Oh, you go to church. Religion, they'll, I don't know, act as an intermediary, and you can get to know God. I don't know. I don't even want to think about it. I have lived a long life, my friends, and I have never had the influence of any religious organization enter my consciousness, ever. I have visited religious organizations from time to time throughout my life with an anthropological point of view, just looking to study what it really is, and very brief looks, and I'm like, and I just walk away. But this idea of church, Yeshua says, I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against my church. And English words, oftentimes it's very good to question all English words from the Bible, because none of them were ever put in the Bible to begin with. And church is a good example. My first understanding of the word church comes from the Greek, because the English word church is a translation of the Greek texts, and it's a word called ecclesia. And it literally means called out ones. Now, if you haven't considered this concept before, just get your Bible out and look for places where it says church, and then read that sentence to yourself over again without saying church. Replace the word church with called out ones, and watch what happens to your understanding of what Yahweh's word is saying. Anyway, perhaps the most important clarification for people to get a firm grasp of is the meaning of this thing called salvation. This whole bit, that Scotty brought up, the fullness of the Gentiles, people think it has to do with salvation. It doesn't. That's kind of really the contrary. And if you go to the newscast 2 weeks ago, you'll see the link to Scotty's video. You can click on it over there and go check that out. More importantly, I have a video beneath today's newscast for you to click on, and that's about this thing called salvation. Many seem to think, or at least act as though salvation is a one-time event. Hey, I'm born again. Or, hey, I got born again back in 1986. I got a birthday coming up in April. I was, going to be X number of years old because I was born again. No one gets born again, my friends. It says born again nowhere in the word. It's born from above. First, we've all been born of water. Yeshua says man must be born of water and of Ruach, spirit. Well, we're all born of water. When a woman's water breaks, a person is born of flesh. And then some become born of the Ruach, born of spirit. That is not born again. That would be like a similar kind of a birth, to be born again. No, this is not similar at all. One is born of the flesh, of water. The other is born of Ruach, of the Spirit, and that is being born from above. Now, salvation is not a one-time event either. Salvation is a matter of making the Yachid of Yahuwah, that is the Father's Son, Yeshua, to make him our Adon, to make him one's master. That's the first step. But salvation and a true relationship with Elohim has 3 stages to it. A lot of people either don't know this, or they ignore it, or they haven't learned it because they didn't go past stage 1. And I have a video linked for you in the Read More section below. It's titled Salvation, Past, Present, and Future, because those are the 3 stages. Salvation past, salvation present, and salvation future. That encompasses the entirety of this idea called salvation. Salvation past is salvation of the Spirit. It's being justified and separated from the penalty of sin. Happened 2,000 years ago and becomes active every time someone prays to the Father and expresses a vow to make Elohim number 1 on a list of 1 in their lives from that day forward. This is where a person receives the indwelling Ruach. Then there's salvation present. This is salvation of the soul. This is where a person is sanctified and separated from the power of sin. Salvation past, we're separated from the penalty of sin. Salvation present, salvation of the soul, of the living experience, and we are separated from the power of sin. Happens every day after salvation past. Thereafter, as we learn to pitch our tents with Elohim by being washed by and growing in Yahweh's Word. This is where a person receives the filling of the Ruach. Salvation past, the indwelling Ruach is received. Salvation present, with the washing and growing of Yahweh's Word. The filling of the Ruach is received. A greater amount, a greater and greater and greater amount. Parable of the 10 maidens. 5 didn't have enough oil. They didn't have enough Ruach. They didn't have the filling. And then part 3, salvation future. This is salvation of the body. It's where a person is glorified and separated from the presence of sin. This happens at the Netchatef, when all those who are called and chosen are taken up to meet Yeshua in the clouds, to be with him in the Shamayim forever. This is all explained in my video titled Salvation, Past, Present, and Future. If you haven't seen this one yet, or haven't watched it in a while, go to the Read More section beneath this video, and you'll see the link. Click on it. Turning to wars and rumors of wars, on Tuesday, January 24th, from Haaretz, Iraqi forces captured all of eastern Mosul, dislodging ISIS from the last district they held east of the Tigris River, just 100 days after the start of the U.S.-backed campaign. Mosul is the Islamic State's last major city stronghold in Iraq. On Friday, January 27th, from ARA News, clashes broke out between Syrian rebel groups and an al-Qaeda splinter group in Syria's northwestern Idlib governorate. Jabhat Fatah al-Sham, previously known as the Nusra Front, clashed with foreign-backed rebel factions in the countryside of Idlib. Rebel fighters of the Free Syrian Army attacked the headquarters of Jabhat Fatah al-Sham in southern Idlib, killing and wounding scores of extremists. And turning to our Intifada update on Sunday, January 22nd, from Ynet News, IDF forces arrested 3 Palestinians from Beit Fajar in the West Bank who threw firebombs at the entrance to Kibbutz Migdal Oz over the weekend. In footage released by the IDF, the Palestinians are seen approaching the kibbutz at night and hurling several firebombs before fleeing. Then on Wednesday, January 25th, from Haaretz, 24-year-old Hussein Salem Abu Ghosh from Kalandia rammed his car into a bus stop where soldiers and civilians were standing before he was shot and killed by the soldiers. No Israelis were injured. Then later on Wednesday, after Israeli soldiers were fired on in the West Bank, the troops returned fire. The assailant was injured, and a rifle was found in his vehicle. Then on Friday, January 27th, from the Times of Israel, a Palestinian opened fire at an Israeli vehicle in the West Bank. No injuries were reported, but multiple bullet holes were found in the car, and several bullet casings were found at the scene. Israeli security forces later arrested 2 Palestinian men suspected of the shooting. The weapon used in the attack, a Carlo-style submachine gun, was found in their possession. Then on Sunday, January 29th, from the Times of Israel, 2 Palestinians were arrested after trying to enter the West Bank town of Karnei Shamron with their knives drawn. And looking at our review of last week's news, even though Obama did his best to throw yet another wrench into the works just hours before Trump was sworn in, Trump has grabbed hold of that wrench and stopped it from hitting its target. Iraqi forces captured all of eastern Mosul, dislodging ISIS from the last district they held east of the Tigris River. Clashes broke out between Syrian rebel groups and an al-Qaeda splinter group in Syria's northwestern Idlib countryside. IDF forces arrested 3 Palestinians in the West Bank who were throwing firebombs. A 24-year-old terrorist rammed his car into a bus stop in the West Bank. Israeli soldiers were fired upon in the West Bank. A Palestinian opened fire at an Israeli vehicle in the West Bank, and 2 Palestinians were arrested after trying to enter a West Bank town with their knives drawn. And that, my friends, is what the LameStream Media is not telling you. Abba willing, I'll see you here again next week. Until then, stay safe. Shalom.
Crowded rooms, I need more space than I consume. Enough is time alone with you, underneath a naked moon, sharing confidential moods and making chatter. Mockingbird nocturnal sings notations of eternal things, entering the quantum breeze, flying not for want of wings. He lights his gaze on you and me, simply because we matter.